Thank you, Ellen, and everyone. Hello, and thank you all for being here. My name is Tori Haynes, Senior Planner for Community Development, and I will be filling in for Tom Leininger to present the transportation section. We also have our consultants, we have our consultants and Keith Nichols from HRTPO here as well to help answer any questions. In this meeting, we will go, next slide. In this meeting, we will go over some of the highlights in the chapter text, the community guidance based on community input received to date, highlight of the UDAs in the county, as well as a brief look at the GSAs from the 2035 comprehensive plan. The consultants will also provide an update to the the travel demand model. Next slide. In June 2020, Keith Nichols and his team at the HRTPO finalized the historic triangle transportation study for James City County, City of Williamsburg, and York County. The purpose of the study was to look at key issues related to transportation and to assist the localities with the transportation sections of their respective comprehensive plan update. This study helped staff prepare for the comprehensive plan update and also help meet VDOT requirements. Next slide. Based on citizen input and overall trend in transportation networks, staff is putting more emphasis on setting the groundwork to create a more connected network. A multimodal transportation network would accommodate additional transportation choices for the user. This network would allow youth, the elderly, people with disabilities, and those without automobiles to reach different areas of the county. A major component, multimodal corridors, are complete streets. This type of design encourages pedestrian and bicycle use, increases safety, and can ease congestion. Complete streets can also be great public places that encourage people to linger on foot, meet with neighbors, and engage in public life. Next slide. A multimodal transportation network can be done in various ways. One way to reconfigure a roadway without spending money on a full roadway construction project is to do a road diet. A 2018 study done by the HRTPO identified 2 roadway segments in the county that could be good candidates for a road diet. The first is Merrimack Trail from the border of James City County and York to the border of James City County and Newport News. The second segment is Pocahontas Trail from Fort Magruder Hotel to Route 199. Further analysis would need to be done to verify the feasibility of a road diet. Next slide. The surrounding communities have a great impact on the county's roadway network. The Historic Triangle Comprehensive Transportation Study provides data illustrating commuting patterns between localities in the period between 2009 and 2013. Between that time frame, Newport News, York County, and Williamsburg were the top destinations for JCC residents to commute to outside of the county, and also the top 3 localities where people commuted from. Next slide. In order to create a multimodal network, the county will need to actively pursue transportation funding. In some cases, multiple funding sources are needed to create a more competitive application. Not all roadway projects are eligible for each funding source. It depends on the proposal as well as the amount of funding being pursued. Next slide. Around the state and around the country, streets are increasingly being considered as more than just pipelines to move cars. They are being redesigned as multimodal corridors that carry people in a variety of travel modes, including cars, trucks, buses, bicycles, and pedestrians. Multimodal streets ultimately have a capacity to move more than streets that only serve cars. Next slide. In July of 2017, the HRTPO adopted the new Birthplace of America trail route. This trail will connect the Virginia Capitol Trail to Fort Monroe, as well as an additional South Side recommendation to connect to the city of Norfolk. Each locality is still able to make minor adjustments to the route in order to find a more desirable location or to utilize existing infrastructure. Next slide. Staff will continue to pursue funding for transportation projects, but to assist with this, expanding our multimodal network and address development impacts, the zoning ordinance was updated in 2018 to require by right development, including expansions, to add or update pedestrian and bicycle accommodations when certain criteria are met. The ordinance requires the installation of the facility specified on the adopted pedestrian master plan and the regional bikeways master plan and must be built to VDOT standards. Next slide. WATA has 12 routes meeting various community needs, such as commuter, recreational, and tourism travel, by providing a coordinated system through fixed routes. WATA currently operates under a transit development plan that was adopted in 2016. In addition to passenger fares, WATA is funded by federal and state grants and contributions made by James City County, the City of Williamsburg, and York County. James City County should continue to encourage the expansion of future transit by encouraging compact mixed-use development that is conducive to transit. Next slide. Another important part of the transportation system in James City County is the Jamestown-Scotland Ferry on the James River. In July 2020, the Jamestown-Scotland Ferry facility received $4.9 million through the U.S. Department of Transportation's Federal Transit Administration Passenger Ferry Grant Program to help improve passenger safety and modernize the ferry slips in Surrey County and Jamestown. The comprehensive plan supports continued 24-hour operation of this critical service. Next slide. The 2019 Citizen Survey resulted in a higher percentage of citizens rating the county's roads and highways as very satisfied or somewhat satisfied. In 2014, that percentage was 59%. 77% of respondents rated bike lanes and sidewalks as very important or somewhat important, which is a decrease from 81% in 2014. Bike and pedestrian accommodations had a satisfaction gap of 6.1%. Roads and highways have a much greater gap at 24.3%. Next slide. Open-ended responses to the citizen survey indicated that while many found the location of the county convenient, there are also many commonly desired changes involving transportation, including improved roads, bike, walking trails, improved congestion, public transportation, and more sidewalks. Many respondents suggested adding more bike lanes, trails, and sidewalks throughout the county, especially in more rural areas. Next slide. During the polling portion of the summit, and online polling that continued weeks after, about 88% of respondents said it was very important or somewhat important for the county to supplement VDOT programs to improve roads and highways. Citizens also provided suggestions on areas where they would like to see improvement, such as Route 60 and Monticello Avenue. Participants were also provided an opportunity to share their big ideas. Many big ideas included support for additional bicycle and pedestrian paths and connecting the places people wanted to go, with some example responses being expand connected network of bike paths and connect neighborhoods with new businesses so workers can bike or walk to work. Other big ideas focused on increased public transit funding, including new bus lines, rail, and connection to other transportation modes, including airports. Next slide. UDAs are areas designated by localities that are appropriate for higher density due to its proximity to transportation facilities, the available of a public or community water and sewer system, or a developed area. Some areas can be used for redevelopment or infill if feasible. James City County has 11 UDAs with various characteristics. Each UDA has a V-Trans 2025 Transportation Needs Assessment that identifies location, socioeconomic characteristics, the current and planned place type, and gaps in the transportation system. James City County should actively continue to submit smart scale applications during each funding cycle to compete for transportation funding opportunities. These applications should address needs identified by VTrans for corridors of statewide significance, regional networks, and UDAs. Next slide. For this initial review, staff has not revised the GSAs that were adopted for the current comp plan. Members of the PCWG are welcome to provide initial suggestions and comments regarding the revision of the GSAs, as well as suggestions for questions to include in the next round of public input. Next slide. Only a limited number of questions can be included in questionnaires, and staff seeks any PCWG feedback on what 2 or 3 key questions might be, either from the list shown or based on the recent PCWG review of the attached documents. And now I will turn it over to the consultants to talk about the transportation modeling overview.
So as a part of this comprehensive plan update, we've been using a travel demand model in conjunction with a land use model. And if you recall, in looking at the diagram, we use the land use model to develop currently 2 land use plans, one named the trend plan, which really just allows housing and employment trends currently observed to come to fruition, and then an alternative scenario. So the flow of information goes from the land use model to the travel demand model. The travel demand model then uses the land use plans developed with a common existing plus committed transportation network to yield demand estimates. And as you can see from the diagram, some of that information goes out to other models that are used in the update, including the fiscal model. And then just a few months ago, if you'll recall, we used the travel demand model output to populate transportation indicators, indicating the relative performance of the land use plans with the existing plus committed network for comparative purposes between the land use alternatives. Next slide, please. So one of the products or deliverables from the comprehensive plan update is a transportation model that is based on the HRTPO regional model, something that county staff can use and modify, land use and transportation system assumptions, and that includes roadways and bus routes, in order to get revised travel demand estimates. And I suppose it's the hope of the county to integrate this tool into their planning activities, so they have a little more flexibility and a bit more, decision-making power in their hands to feed their transportation planning process. So, the model that I'm speaking about has been used to get regional data for the trend scenario, the alternative scenario. And as I mentioned before, we use the existing plus committed network as a common element in comparing the performance of the land use scenarios. Next slide, please. So with any travel demand modeling process, and specifically with respect to the process I just described with our different scenarios, we take the travel demand model and we make certain adjustments after running the model with assumptions about a base year, and that is a year where we have observed transportation behavior. So we assume the land use, in this case, it's year 2017, and we also assume a transportation system. In 2017, we run that model and we look at the outputs and compare those outputs to certain things like traffic counts. We want to be sure that the travel model is replicating observed travel behavior. And then we use that model to develop forecasts into the future by updating the land use and transportation system assumptions. And in the case of the comprehensive plan update, we've already run the trend scenario and the alternative scenario, and then there will be a final adopted future land use that we will use the travel model to produce demand estimates. And again, for each of these, we evaluate the results for reasonableness and performance. Next slide, please. And if you'll remember, these are some of the performance indicators that we showed to you a couple of months ago graphically and in tabular fashion, and they address, certain areas of the planning process that are important to the county. And some of the individual measures include how well the demand matches up with capacity, what are the consequences for automobile emissions, what are the changes in travel times and congestion on roadways, and what access does the traveling public have to, for instance, high-density employment areas, and also change in transit ridership. So these are the kinds of things that a travel demand model can provide within the context of a planning exercise, and we will be updating these when we run the final land use scenario. Next slide, please. So what we're calling the leave behind travel model, as I stated before, it's going to be based on the features of the regional model. That's what we're scoped to do. It's going to have a smaller geographic footprint. So in other words, it's not going to operate on the entire region, but will be focused on a geographic area around James City County. This offers a couple of advantages, including smaller data requirements and quicker execution times on part of the travel model. But unlike the regional model, this model has a more refined and detailed roadway network representation. We've worked with the county to get to that point so far. And there is also a complete revalidation of base year conditions, focusing on the performance of the model in York, Williamsburg, and James City counties. The aggregate population and employment values are based on the HRPDC forecast for 2045, but as I mentioned, the land use scenarios were crafted based on the needs perceived by this plan update. Next slide, please. So just, as a check on what this travel model really does, and you folks that are planners, there's something that's typically called the four-step planning process, and it kind of answers the questions that you see in the diagram in the order that you see things proceeding from the top to the bottom. So trip generation, how many trips are generated and what kind, and that's based on different housing types and employment types, household sizes, income levels. And then once we know how many trips are generated, then we want to find out where are they going from point A to B in the region or in the study area for our case. And that's a function of travel costs and also a function of how many trips in any given area are being generated. So there's a magnitude of trips dimension to that and a distance or cost dimension to that. And then once we know the travel patterns, then there's the selection of mode. So if someone wants to go from A to B, are they going to choose the bus? Are they going to choose the carpool? Are they going to choose to drive alone? And then finally, once those choices are determined, then folks need to determine what actual route they're taking making use of the roadway network or the bus network to determine how they're going to get from A to B. And so those are your 4 steps. That's basically what a travel demand model addresses. Next slide, please. And so there are many applications a travel demand model, if maintained and cared for properly, in-house can provide. So it's everything from informing a comprehensive plan update like we're doing, or it could be corridor studies, multimodal corridor studies to determine what changes need to be made in certain corridors for certain outcomes, reducing highway travel, for instance. That would be one use of the travel model. Traffic impact analysis, what happens when you assume certain developments on sites that are undeveloped. A travel demand model can serve as one of the ingredients that goes into that type of a study. And of course, transit service planning. Travel demand model can help you determine if to encourage transit use, you need to expand the area of service, or do you need to increase the frequency of service? These are all questions that can be answered in part with the help of a network-based transportation demand model. And I believe I will hand it over to, I believe that's my last slide.